We've been meeting ever since July, but I swear we have covered so much, but we're almost there. We only have 2 meetings left. But before we get started with today's agenda, I do want to share a key leadership update regarding this work group. Our previous chair, Shana Hernandez, she is no longer with the administration, and she was really hoping that she could be here for this meeting so that she could, just acknowledge each of your contributions and tell you how grateful she was to be a part of this work group and lead the work group. And just, she just really wanted to give you comments on how important these discussions have been. And so we wish her all the best as she starts her new position, and we will miss her. But now I am really delighted to introduce to you the new Deputy Chief of Staff for Governor Moore. That is Chi-Chi Niagashnash. I hope I said your name right. You'll correct me if I didn't get it right, Chi-Chi. But naturally, Chi-Chi would have been the next chair of this work group. But because we're basically at the finish line, and so she decided to just pass the baton on to me. And so I am really happy to be your new chair for the next 2 meetings. And I'm going to make sure that I guide each of you through this last stage. But Chi-Chi, can I turn it over to you so you can say a few words?
Absolutely, very few. Good afternoon, everyone. I see a lot of familiar faces, some faces that I don't recognize, but I've heard a lot about this group and about the nature of the candid conversations and deliberative, progress that has been made. And, as Secretary McElwain said, it doesn't make sense to upset the apple cart this close to the finish line. And so I am here to play a big game of catch up and be a thought partner and just help as a senior member of the working group get us to the end. But we are in great hands with, as you all know, with Secretary McElwain. So I look forward to meeting those of you that I don't know in whatever capacity it will be that we cross paths, and excited to listen in and participate in this conversation today. Thank you. Thanks, Secretary.
Thank you. We are so glad to have you here. So with that, let's just turn to the business of today. So first, I wanted to just take a real quick refresh on the purpose of this work group. Earlier this year, there were a lot of concerns from the automotive industry related to the targets and timelines in the Advanced Clean Cars 2 and the Advanced Clean Trucks regulations. And as a result, the governor issued an executive order that directed MDE, which is my agency, to exercise enforcement discretion. But he also formed this work group with the specific charge to recommend any ideas that, could really drive success of the clean vehicle programs that we have. And so right after that, as we all know and remember, the Trump administration and Congress revoked California's waivers and their authority, which impacted all of the states, all of the 177 states. And so we're here today. So in this work group that we've had since July, there has been a lot of information shared, a lot of data, scenarios. We've had a lot of conversations, and we've shared information and data between industry, between the state agencies. And so I think that now we have a better understanding of what we should recommend as a measure of strengthening the path we need to take to ensure that we have better EV sales in Maryland, and to also help the industry meet the targets that they're required to meet. And that's why I think when we met back in July, we discussed that this work group should expand our focus beyond just ACC2 and ACT, but look at all the structural challenges that we have in terms of when we think about accelerating deployment of EVs in the state. Because regardless of, honestly, and I think we all know this, regardless of where we end up with ACC2 and ACT in court, or even with the federal government, we know that we still need to do more so that we can accelerate Maryland's path to electrification and decarbonization. And all of us in this work group, if you recall, when we first met, we all acknowledged that everyone, not just state government, should be at this table. And that's why we're at this table together, and that the recommendations should reflect not just the members of this work group, but also some of the stakeholders that may not be on this work group. So now what I'd like to do is just turn our attention to the recommendations part of this meeting today. So we received about 50 recommendations, and we consolidated them down to 30. So no, we didn't get rid of any. We just pulled them together, consolidated where we thought we had pretty much the same recommendation. So what I want to do now is talk about what our role as a work group and what I think we should do with all of these recommendations. Because I want us first to all understand and remember that this is not a chartered commission. This is not a decision-making authority either. It's a work group. And our charge was to come up with recommendations. So there is no way for this group, in my opinion, to decide like which recommendations from the report will actually be implemented. There's no way we could decide that. But that doesn't mean that these recommendations are not important. It basically, it's just the opposite of that. The governor, state agencies and commissions and the legislators, they're all depending on us to really evaluate all the ideas that we talked about and all the issues, and again, all the data, evaluate all of that and elevate ideas and come up with some real impactful and implementable recommendations for Maryland. And that's why I really want us to take a hard look at these great ideas that we have and make sure that we're framing these ideas with impact and implementation in mind. And I do want to make sure that everything, and I hope you agree, but everything that we put in those recommendations are legal and we can legally do. And I just want to give you one example of one that I read. There was a recommendation that essentially proposed that the OEMs disclose the money that they're spending on advertising. Well, we can't do that, but we can probably reframe that recommendation as something, maybe we can think about something that we can do. So I'm not saying get rid of the recommendation. I'm thinking we can make that recommendation in a way that makes a little more sense, because legally we can force or do something, but we can talk about all of that later once we get to it. I also want to mention that I saw some other recommendations that I read that basically was directing PSC to require really a lot of things. I don't think that we can do that either. I know the PSC has a lot of thoughts on this as well. It's an independent commission, and so I think we should frame the recommendations as recommendations and not directions, right? Again, these are just my thoughts. We can talk about this later and make sure that, we all kind of agree if something is doable or not. When you think about regulations, legal, can we do it? So I personally think that we should, as we're thinking about these recommendations, and we're about to go into that piece of that part of this agenda, but I think we should set ourselves up so that we're taken really seriously as a work group. And I think the way that we can show up with serious recommendation is just for us to tighten up those recommendations so that they're received well. So now with that, I want to if we can just talk about the process, we can get into that. And eventually soon, we're going to get into the actual recommendations. So I want to acknowledge that I've been hearing, and I think some of the other folks on the work group, we've been hearing that some of you, some of the work group members are frustrated with this process of developing the recommendations. And I get it. I understand. And I realize also that early on, we did mention consensus, but we really didn't talk about what that really meant. And I think that brought on even more confusion. But regardless, we're right here now. And my goal is really to be as clear about the process as possible so that we are on the same page. And I do want to ensure that this process reflects the full diversity of the views that were represented by this group, because all of you matter. All of you have a voice, and we want to make sure your voice is heard. So I have two thoughts that I wanted to share. First, I don't think, and I did talk with my staff members about this. I talked with members of the committee on this work group. I don't think that getting consensus on each recommendation is actually possible, and I don't think it's going to serve us efficiently. Second, we don't have time to actually go through a whole voting process for a consensus on 30 recommendations. There's just a lot of opinions and a lot that goes into that. I don't think we have enough time to get that done. So what I'd like for us to do today is go through those recommendations. We want to hear your feedback from everyone. Let's discuss where some edits would be beneficial. But again, just remember that when we're talking about these recommendations, we want to show up seriously. So let's tighten up those recommendations and move on. What I also like for all of us to do is suggest that I suggest that we will send the revised recommendations out maybe to all of you so that you can review them after, we talk about it today and we have this whole discussion. So you'll get a chance to see everything that we've done, and then we can put all the recommendations in the report. But we'll also send out a form that everybody can use to recommend their top 3 or 5 recommendations. I think we can do that at the end when we clean them all up. So with that, I think what we can do is we can take maybe 5 minutes so we can discuss any of your concerns or any questions that you may have regarding what I just said about the process. And then we can get to work and looking at these recommendations, making them tight and moving on. Okay, it's open. The floor is open. 5 minutes. Any questions?
Sure. This is Josh Stebbins, Sierra Club in conference room on the 4th floor of the Weingard House. I appreciate the explanation for why you think that we are not going to even try to identify if there are recommendations everybody agrees with. That's helpful to know. I think it would be probably a lot more powerful to identify if there are recommendations that with some wordsmithing everybody agrees with. But if that's not the process we're going to take, then I appreciate that, and I think that. I think we could have done this by submitting written recommendations, and I do find it personally disappointing that that's what we're going to do is have a list of recommendations that people have identified. With regard to the PSE recommendations, these were all recommendations. None of them were directives, and they were put forward in good faith to see if there are common areas of agreement that we could move forward with and propose to the commission. So I appreciate the time to raise those points.
Well, I appreciate you, and I appreciate everything, all the contributions from you and the recommendations as well. Thank you for kind of understanding. I know what I've just laid out is not, everyone's not going to agree with it, but I promise you, I'm trying to think about the most efficient way to do this and to make sure your voices are heard. So thank you for your input. I really do appreciate you. Any other questions?
Delegate Stein, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Madam Secretary, for outlining the process that we'll be using. My question about the form that you referenced whereby task force members will be able to indicate their top 3 or 5 recommendations. Will that information be then used to present in the report which recommendations received more support than others?
Um,
If I, would you like me to step in, Secretary? So as we were talking about this, yes, we think that what we don't want to do is vote down any recommendations that really should be represented in this, in this report to the General Assembly and the governor, but also, to Josh's point, capture areas where there is, if not consensus, at least broader support. And so our thought was that we can, when we send out the revised recommendations, we can send it out with, another Google form on which people can indicate their top 3 or top 5, and we'll put that in the report, and we'll say, we'll include all of the recommendations in a section, but indicate areas that received broad support from members of the work group include, and we can then identify what those are.
Great,
Just to
thanks
jump
very
in,
much.
Mr. Delegate, I think,
Yes.
we would highlight those 3 to 5 at the top of the recommendations in the final report so that the General Assembly can see that those were the 3 to 5 that had the most support amongst work group members out of the 30 recommendations.
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, that gives it, some credit. We're not voting, but I think that's a good balance for us. I thought I saw a hand.
You had Susan Miller.
Good afternoon, Susan Miller with Earth Justice. I have a process question. Now, while I hope this doesn't come up, if there is a recommendation that certain parties actually feel strongly opposed to, is there going to be any notation of that in the report? Or is that going to be left to the individual parties to kind of put forth publicly on their own?
That's a good question.
I think that's something we'd like to discuss a little further and maybe come back to, work on that a bit and come back at the December meeting, with an answer to that.
I think that also goes to the cleaning up part. Like, if it's a legal issue that we know we can't do, or we're imposing something that's contrary to, I don't know, the governance of whoever we're telling to do, this is where that conversation, is really important. But it's just, if it's something just, I guess, something that's just basic, not basic, but something that should be considered, but no one likes it but one person, that will probably come out when we start talking about it. Will it go in the report anyway? Most likely, the way I see it, yes. But it wouldn't be the top 5, right? If a lot of people are saying, oh, no, that's not going to work. Why would we do that? It's not going to be the top 5 that people did kind of raise their hand to, hey, I like that. But again, we can get into that later.
Okay, thank you.
Ben, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, Ben Baker, Maryland Public Service Commission. I was just going to say on that point, when I ran a work group last year, EV community, there we definitely had some recommendations there. Maybe the charging community was opposed, or the public interest were opposed, or it was. And so during that report, we kind of tried to capture at a time like this industry has concerns, maybe is a little less of an oppose versus a concern. So maybe in your feedback form, consider giving parties an opportunity just to say, I have some concerns here, here's where they are. And maybe as you draft your final report, you can find a way to tactfully incorporate that. So if somebody does have concerns, maybe it comes through, but it's not a complete opposition, if that makes sense. Just food for thought. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Makes sense. Any other questions or concerns, thoughts about the process? It does matter. We do want to hear from you. All right. I think it's time to move forward to the next step.
All right. So does that mean I think it's turning it over to?
Well,
Or, go
I
ahead.
think I want to turn it over to Megan. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we get started?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone. I actually have found, despite this topic being, having been a pretty difficult one for a lot of states, I found this work group to have been really constructive, and just want to say I really appreciate everyone in the work group for how constructive everyone has handled themselves and in reviewing all of these recommendations in advance. I think that people did a really good job in putting their best foot forward, and just want to say I appreciate all of you for the hard work that you've put into this. I know this is people putting their personal time on top of their jobs into this. So I'm just looking forward to the discussion today, and thank you, Secretary.
Thank you. Okay, Zach, are you ready? Who's taking it over at this point?
I think that is, well, I'm about to share my screen. All right, is everybody seeing tab with recommendation, with the recommendations document that we shared with the group? Okay, great. So what we wanted to do from here is to spend, the remainder of our time, we will take a break in the middle, going through sort of en banc the recommendations received here, by each category, charging infrastructure, regulatory actions, incentives, et cetera. And, we're not going to read out each recommendation and wordsmith it here, just, in the interest of time. But we know that you've, either you're the originator or one of the many originators of several of these, of many of these recommendations, or we know that everybody's read them and has feedback. So we want to get your feedback as we go through, where that you have strong concerns or strong ideas for how to improve a recommendation or reframe it. One of the things I'd encourage us to all think about is is also like the voice of speaking for this work group in one document. So that's one of the things that we're looking at as we look at the language, and then we'll take all the feedback that we get from this meeting, and make any further adjustments, and then send that hopefully near final version around to everybody as soon as possible, with that form to vote for sort of priority or the most important recommendations. I know that there's some folks who have already shared that they're going to have feedback on some. So I encourage anybody who wants to jump in as we start to go through them. I will be taking notes here in comments, as we go. So if I could turn it over, as we start, we're going to start with the top here with charging infrastructure. If anyone wants to just raise their hand and jump in on any of the recommendations in that charging infrastructure section related to completing the federally funded EV-related charging infrastructure recommendation, incentivizing community multifamily investments, looking at those models to encourage additional private sector investment, and then road signage, and it was a very discrete recommendation that MDOT submitted. And then thinking about how to differentiate planning for both medium duty and heavy duty vehicles, as I know, Louis, you submitted, which I know was a theme that definitely emerged for me too in those discussions. So charging infrastructure, any specific suggestions, concerns, suggested edits? Louis?
Yeah, Zach. So this is actually just a question about the first one, about taking all relevant and available legal action to unlock frozen funds. Has that been, I thought those funds were restored. Is that not accurate? I'm really not at all opposing the recommendation. I'm just looking for clarification about that status.
Bo, I see your hand is up. Go ahead, or Ian, I don't know, or Joe.
Yeah.
I can chime in on it. Indeed, Louis, you're correct. The funding has been restored through litigation. I think what advocates want to see is that money, and forgive me for not knowing there's an appropriate word here, but we want to see that money into pockets so that it is not at risk of further federal infringement. This administration has not exactly shown its trustworthiness on adhering to these types of obligations. And this has been a pretty common theme amongst charging advocates across the country to hey, you've got this money, let's get it out the door so that this federal administration cannot try and mess around with it as quickly as possible.
Is the word you're looking for encumber?
Perhaps.
We're obligated is usually.
Obligated, that's what I'm looking for.
So is it maybe what it really is, you know, the state should take, you know, all steps necessary to expediently obligate and encumber those funds?
You mind if I answer this one here, guys?
Yeah.
So we we are currently in negotiation with FHWA to do this. So I don't necessarily think we need to, we can always put this in as a recommendation if you guys would like. At the end of the day, we need FHWA as our, you know, approval entity to let us do it. While we have peers in the rest of the country that have been able to do it, if you're not aware, FHWA operates in a unique form and fashion. It's each state to their own a bit. So we're working through it. SHA, State Highway Administration, has submitted all of the documentation requesting a full block obligation is what it is called, to try to get pre-approval to obligate those dollars. And there was a call last Friday. There will be another call this Friday. We're trying to work to get it to a place where our dollars would be obligated as well. So I would hope by the next time we come back together, we should hopefully have some good news or not. But at the end of the day, we're working this angle as hard as we can.
Thanks, Joe. That's helpful. I see Josh's hand up and then Megan.
Yeah, I apologize for any confusion. The money actually has not been restored. The NEVI money has, but Maryland is also the recipient of significant funds under what's called the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Program, Maryland Clean Energy Center, and Maryland, I believe it's DOT through as a re-grant or subsidiary grant, is receiving money for medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure. So the precise dollars I don't have in front of me, but if you refer back to the initial letter we sent in August, you'll see that it's less money from Maryland under the CFI or Charging Fueling Infrastructure Grant program, but there is money that is still frozen that's not moving forward, and that the Attorney General would have to join other states to litigate over in order to unfreeze.
Understood. Okay. That's a helpful clarification. Thank you, Josh. With that clarification, Joe, any concerns on the MDOT side on that language?
Yeah, I mean, that's totally fair. I think at the end of the day, we are trying to do that. We are in discussion with our Attorney General's team about strategy and approach. We're talking to our peer states that find ourselves in the same spot regarding the discretionary grants that Josh referenced.
Megan?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize what Joe said for everyone on the call. You know, I help coordinate the governor's federal investment team. This is our team that's all about federal funding. And, you know, we can't share details, but MDOT's got some really good stuff they're working on NEVI that should be announced before the end of the year. So like Joe said before, hopefully by the time this report is out, there'll be good news to share on that front.
All right. Josh, I see your hand is still up. Do you have comments or thoughts on other recommendations that you wanted to weigh in on too? On the charging infrastructure group?
No.
Okay. Ben?
Thanks. Just a couple. On the incentivize and expand equitable, I was wondering if there was a reason MDOT wasn't included in that list of agencies. They're kind of central, I find, to all EV strategies. So just wondering if, Joe, you'd have any issue being included in that group.
No, glad to do it. And I think, we've been talking about this. Our primary role in terms of how we are going to support in the near term is through NEVI community charging. I don't think it will necessarily be within parking structures, but probably we're still working out the strategy on how we're going to do it and manage that. But I think we have a role to play in the community side.
Also, PSC is always looking to partner with other agencies in terms of understanding straight strategy to make sure utility investment is incrementally helping. So we have no issues there.
We enjoy a good partnership.
Excellent. I guess, and then this is sort of related to the first box and then the separate charging infrastructure. So I feel like there's a little bit of a conflict here where one recommendation is saying we should prioritize the big boys with our federal funding for the highway. But then this other one's like, hey, we need to start thinking about if we should separate our treatment of medium duty versus heavy duty and then prioritize medium duty. So I guess those feel like they're in conflict a little bit. I don't know if it makes more sense to change the first one to be more like we should refer that to more of a, like the state needs a strategy on how they want to approach it. And then maybe this is a flow into that. I generally agree with the idea that we probably focus a little bit more on medium duty up front as the heavy duty ones are kind of more interstate in terms of hoping that they show up. But I'd be curious to hear what other members have to say on that.
Ian?
Right. I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think that, and I didn't propose the recommendation, but I think the idea of NEVI being utilized for the corridor charging is sort of what the emphasis is in that recommendation, just because of the scale of the challenge there and the available resources. And I recognize also now the distinction that Josh raised about different pots of federal money. So I thought that was sort of what that was focused on there, is that the NEVI be used for the corridor charging, not necessarily that, all federal money be utilized that way. I think that we do recognize that we're going to move into a phase where we can prioritize, the community charging and other kind of sectors. And so, I guess that overlaps some with the big trucks that are going to be needing that kind of charging, but I don't think that was the focus.
Okay. All right. And then my last one is under standardized EV installation guidelines. That doesn't really impact the PSC, just knowing from our experience with dealing with counties in our CPCN process. Does this make more sense instead of take steps to maybe have Vic or somebody study if we need to do streamlining in the state before we say we need to do streamlining? So turn that recommendation to more of a study for one of the agencies to figure out if it's actually a barrier in the state or how we go about it.
Are we at that one yet?
It's in this group.
I'm sorry, I
happy to-
down a page. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yep. So you're suggesting maybe you switch this from, instead of taking the step now, study the benefits that taking that step might accrue.
And or what the recommendations actually, right now it's a very broad statement, we should streamline. I couldn't tell any of the elected officials, the delegate Stein, what he should or shouldn't do here, but also knowing that, we've had our own share of fights with the counties over generation siting. This would just be another example of the state getting involved with zoning rules. Local counties. So just tread lightly might be my advice here.
I think that's a good recommendation. However, I do think it's not only a Maryland issue, it's a U.S. issue. So
just trying to think how to make it go incrementally to the next step.
Yep. All right. Other feedback on chargers or charging infrastructure? I hear a hand signal, but I don't see the hand icon.
It's me. Just under the private investment, this is an easy one. I just thought we should strike the part in parentheses. I just didn't think it was necessary.
Sorry, say that again. I've just found it.
Under the private investments, we have it including from OEMs. I didn't think the part in parentheses was necessary. I mean, the point gets across without it. I'm nitpicking, but
Well, seeing no opposition to that.
Yeah, that's my recommendation, and I have no concerns about removing that. Megan. Yeah, that's a.
All right. Any other reactions or comments on charging infrastructure investments? Or sorry, charging infrastructure recommendations. All right. Should we move on to education and marketing? All right, so here we similarly received about 6 or 7, well, we consolidated down to about 6 or 7 recommendations. There's pretty good diversity in the types of approaches suggested here. Everything from, consumer-facing education to, direct consumers, fleet consumers, so conducting regular webinars on fleet adoption, a lot of fleet-focused recommendations, so outreach to target the potential future and past vehicle electric users. We had discussion earlier on during the work group that I see is reflected here around building information dashboards and a centralized point of entry for people who want to consider purchasing an electric vehicle, and especially for fleet managers who are considering fleet investments in vehicles. And then some of that at a more consumer facing level, looked at investing in community benefit organizations to provide outreach and education. There were some recommendations for the PSC to leverage utility communications to educate consumers about the benefits of EV ownership. And then, as the secretary mentioned in her opening remarks, one about transportation and vehicle advertising, where we don't know that there's a legal mechanism to require the disclosure of where dealers or OEMs spend their money, but that the spirit of prioritizing advertising for EVs is something that certainly could be recommended on a voluntary basis. So those are some of the top line thoughts that as the moderator I'd offer. Any reactions, questions, concerns? I think I need to expand my window so I can see whose hand is up. Ben.
it's Ben.
Thanks, Zach. Real quick, just a couple things. Under fund community-led EV awareness and use EV support hubs, can we spell out what CBO is? I don't think I know that acronym.
No.
Let's see. And then on the fund community-led, the build a trusted state dashboard. I like that idea. I guess my main question is who it is. I think when we originally discussed this idea in the work group, it sounded like that might be maintained by the dealerships, and then the state might provide information to make sure that the information being provided was reasonable. And so anyways, just curious, I like the idea, maybe just some tweaking around, or if whoever recommended that wanted to speak up if they think it should be the state versus a private business. But that was generally they'll like the idea. And then leverage utility. So I guess this is the one I did want to speak to. Yes, I would say we're more in favor of exploring these ideas than directed. I've reached out to the Sierra Club on this. Josh, you're welcome to respond. I would strike the on customer bills statement. Utilities are already doing a lot of stuff on their websites, and it's debatable if they look at their bills. So I would remove that, and then provide continued educational informational support for fleet customers. Generally okay idea, I think, but we do have that as an active proposal in front of the commission, so I'm neutral as of right now on that item.
Wait, can you, sorry, moving slower than.
Yeah, sorry.
The second one was providing continued education, information, support.
Yeah, that. I just want to make sure everyone's aware that kind of idea is actually actively before the commission for decision right now. Going back to part of why I want that wording to be explore instead of require.
Hey, Ben, can I propose a question for you? Since the governor, and this is the governor's work group, we can't necessarily direct the PSC to do anything since you're an independent body. How should we word any recommendations that have to do with the PSC? You know, Zach and I talked about this in advance, whether or not it should be something that says the Maryland General Assembly could propose legislation that directs the Public Service Commission to do X, Y, and Z. If that's how all recommendations that have to do the PSC should be worded, do you think that that's the best course of action? Because really it's the General Assembly that could direct you to do something, not the governor.
Right. I think it could be suggest somebody like you could have your agencies like MEA or MDOT come to us and make recommendations. Those are all ways like those kinds of ideas get in front of us. So typically, I think we kind of I typically take the positions in these kind of groups, whether it be a legislative recommendation or one to the governor's office, where more of a position that the commission explore this. We have a very active proceeding and work group on all these issues for the most part. So it's not, in fact, I think a number of these ideas have been proposed to the commission before or actively being considered by the commission. So I would say coming from the governor's office, anything that's kind of discussing us exploring the idea or ensuring that the idea is covered or debated, I think is maybe like that kind of explore or suggest that we consider it. And I'm happy to think of more specific language if you want it.
Okay, got it. Helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I think in the second one you mentioned, Ben, if whoever recommended that one was at the community-led EV awareness hubs, or was it you had a question?
Yeah, I had a question. It was under the the dashboard, build a trusted state dashboard.
No, yes, the dashboard. Any thoughts from the group on ownership? I mean, we also don't have to determine the implementation structure for any of these here. Again, to reiterate the secretary, we're not an implementing body. I mean, I think that the goal is to capture the recommendations, and then, members of this body and other stakeholders not represented on the work group can pick those recommendations up and figure out what the path is to actionalizing them. But any early strong thoughts on that?
Works for me.
All right, so Peter Kitzmiller is going to develop the dashboard himself.
Sounds good.
All right. All right, well then let's move on to incentives. We are breezing through. That's 1/3 of our recommendations.
Oh no, hey Zach, it's Lewis. Sorry, I was slow putting my hand up, waiting for the discussion to conclude. I do have the secretary's already made reference to the final recommendation on transparency in vehicle advertising and whether that would even be legal. So can we figure out if there is some wordsmithing or if that needs to be removed entirely as a recommendation?
Lewis, thank you so much for pulling that back up. Yeah, so I was thinking that there's the concept in here is, I think, a worthwhile recommendation. Encourage more more targeted advertising on electric vehicles. So I mean, I think that per the secretary's comments about early on in this work group, we discussed that this is an all hands on deck initiative. This isn't just actions for state agencies or commissions or the legislature to take on. There are things that private industry can do, and NGOs and utilities. And so, I mean, do you have thoughts on, is this something that you think, and Peter, interested in your thoughts as well, Bo and Cynthia, is this something where, a useful recommendation could be, encourage, dealers and automakers to, look at, to recommend that they invest more in advertising for EVs. I mean, I know it's softer and voluntary, but is that something that you think is worthwhile?
Zach, you do have two hands. You have Bo.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the hand. So yeah, Rachel,
I'll
could
help
you
you.
click on the hands?
Yeah. So Bo, then Dana, then Peter.
Oh, you're on mute, Bo.
That would help. Why don't we toss this to Peter? I have a comment on another one of the topics.
Well, no, I think Dana's next, so Stein, go ahead.
This is just a very technical suggestion. I think CBO should we say community-based organization as opposed to community benefit organization?
Yes.
Right. Thank you.
And, I think with regards to advertising, I think the secretary is correct, number one, about the legality of number two. I don't think it really adds anything. I mean, the manufacturers and the dealers are going to advertise EVs because EVs are part of the portfolio going forward. I mean, they're going to do that. I think there's certainly 2-3 years ago, I think there was some concern raised. Oh, you never see any ads for an EV or anything else. I think that clearly has not been the case, certainly for the last 18 months. I mean, it's everywhere. It's going to continue, to go down that path. And I would like to just touch base on the dashboard. I think it's a really good idea. I think that, we have to be cognizant of the fact that the people that wanted to have an EV because of the environmental benefits, we've gotten those people. We now have to sell these vehicles on their merits, and they have significant merits. I think having a sort of third-party dashboard with, general statements about cost of an EV versus an ICE vehicle, whether you call it a frequently asked question or myth or whatever, you hear from people, oh, well, I don't want to buy an EV because it's going to burn my house down. None of that's accurate. And so, and again, from a dealer's perspective, we're going to market these vehicles, how we're going to, market them. But I think it's going to have a lot more weight with consumers if they read it somewhere other than, hey, the car dealer or the car manufacturer is telling us all these things. If they read it somewhere else, that some of these myths are not true. And, I know we can't get specific on cost because cost is going to depend on where you live and what time you charge and all those things. But we could come up with something that gives somebody an idea going in that, hey, this is a benefit I hadn't even thought about. I could save X, Y, Z amount of money, generally, and then we can go from there.
Gotcha. So your recommendation is, third party is the crux of that.
I think it would be more effective. Now certainly, we had a board meeting last week, and I mentioned this to our board. Can the association, put something together? Frankly, in that circumstance, an association, our website, consumers don't go there. We're not going to have any impact. What we talked about was maybe we could put together a template for our members if they wanted to take that and use it on their websites or whatever. We could help them work with that. So we're going to look at that. But I think a third party, I don't know who that would be. And, I'm not trying to create work for somebody else, but I think if we had a third party, it might have more impact.
Zach, we have a hand from Cynthia and a few comments in the chat.
I agree with Peter with regard to both the comments he made with regard to the advertising. We're going to advertise these vehicles because we're investing in them and when we want to sell them. I don't think that comment is necessary in terms of the dashboard. If you recall, at the last meeting, I did a co-presentation with Velos. And so that's a third party we could actually use to build that dashboard. And then we can provide links that can be shared via the state's website as well as dealerships and such. So the CalSTARS and Velos third party organizations can help there.
We also have a hand from Bo. Zach.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Yeah, would second Cynthia's recommendation between, a Velos or a CalSTAR, both great works who have, a great deal of credibility. I will say to the question on advertising, Rivian's going to be biased. We only make electric cars. Every dollar we advertise, 100%. I think that there is value to the state in this moment as, the federal government is taking more of an antagonistic approach toward this technology, that the state should want to know how, players in the space are acting, especially over the next couple of years. Whether that information is, kept close or shared publicly is ultimately up to, the powers that be. But there's certainly value in it. And it's at the same time completely valid that companies like Cynthia's are going to continue making and selling and marketing these products. Not everyone is. And the state should have an interest in finding those facts as they come to light.
Suggestions, Bo or otherwise, on how to adjust the recommendation to sort of reflect, what we can do within the frameworks the legal frameworks we have.
I'll, if it's all right, I'll come back to you on that and give it some thought. And while I have the floor briefly, if it's not too much to jump to another of these suggestions in here, the second one on outreach to targeted to potential future and past electric vehicle users. Look, I like a lot of the recommendations in this section being community driven, being a little bit kind of grassroots. This is a demonstrated way to sell and market electric vehicles. This one's very prescriptive. And I'm kind of just questioning, like, sure, it's something that we want to know. Manufacturers, dealers, we're all doing consumer outreach and research all the time. I don't know that the state kind of getting involved here. I just kind of question, like, to what end. This information is generally available. So I just don't quite know how useful it ultimately would be.
Thanks for that feedback. And to be clear, I think it is within the, purview of the work group here to say, actually, we don't think that a recommendation is necessary, or we can capture the intent of it somewhere, wrapped into another recommendation. I can't recall who proposed this recommendation. We want to, represent the voices of everybody who submitted it. But if anybody has feedback, either way on that, please speak up. Lewis?
Yeah, this was actually my recommendation, and if the group feels like they don't want to put it forward, I'm not wed to it. But I think here's one of the things that I think we've seen throughout this entire work group is a comment repeatedly made that once you buy an electric vehicle, you never go back. And that is not true based on some of the data that I have seen. And so I think we want to assume that's true, when what we really should be doing is finding out when that doesn't occur. And when that occurs and people do go back to ICE vehicles, because there is data that clearly demonstrates that they do, we should be asking the question why that is, so that we can overcome those reasons why a consumer might make that choice. That's why the recommendation is there. But I'm happy to withdraw it if the group doesn't feel like it's warranted. So.
I guess my only question, and Lewis, thanks for the explainer. It's a great perspective. I guess my question is, like, does this fall within kind of the parameters, Zach? And it sounds like yes, of the working group. And, like, would there be an entity within the state who we could, like, suggest this to?
I think that's where we still would need to work on some of the implementation of a recommendation like this, like where it would live and how it would be operable, especially as you're crossing between different dealers, and how would that information flow? I wonder, Lewis, maybe if we could, in the intervening, couple days, think about how to capture that. I think it's a fair point about understanding why people are making certain choices. what the best strategy is to go about that. I mean, studying, unadoption rates, et cetera. I think that there's probably a way to frame this that captures the importance of understanding those sort of that regressive consumer backwards consumer choice, from the perspective of all trying to lean forward on this.
Yeah, I'm very flexible on
Yeah.
this recommendation, so let me be clear about that. Yeah.
I definitely wouldn't call them an ICE vehicle. That means different things to people right now.
Yeah, I caught that as I was reading the recommendations. So we will just spell out internal combustion engine. All right. Any other thoughts or questions on charging and education marketing? All right, incentives. So this is an area where I think we had some very clear feedback during the work group conversations around the effectiveness of some of the existing programs, how to recalibrate some of them. So, a lot of focus on in particular charger infrastructure incentives and multifamily charger investments in particular. And then looking at fleet electrification incentives, and then further studies of it. So opening the floor, Lewis and Ian, I know you've had a lot of thoughts in this area, so I'll turn to you next. Lewis first.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the second item on expanding EV adoption incentives. So I'm not opposed to that, but here's where I do have some concerns, right? So this particular recommendation makes reference to state and local fleets adopting the advanced clean fleets rule. And then there's a recommendation at the end that also talks about the advanced clean fleets rule without the designation of state and local fleets. There is no advanced clean fleets rule. California withdrew its waiver in the last 3 weeks or so of the Biden administration, so they don't even have an advanced clean fleets rule. So if the state wants to move forward or the group wants to recommend those targets, one, you'd only have the authority to do that on your own agency fleets, right? So you'd be looking at the public sector fleets. So, and I'm not clear in this recommendation of when we say we should expand EV purchase incentives, fleet electrification standards, I'm not sure what that means. And then requiring large fleet operators to match public investments. But I think most of the grant programs, I know certainly the medium and heavy duty grant program that MEA pushes out, it's only the differential that is covered under that program between an internal combustion diesel truck and the electric vehicle. So they're already making large investments in this equipment. So I think I need a little more clarification on this particular recommendation.
Thanks, Lewis. And is this one that Sierra Club had submitted initially?
It might be, but based on its current form, I can't tell. What we did submit was tied solely to public fleets.
Okay.
And I can offer, Zach, we, in one of our recommendations, reference advanced clean fleets as well within the purview of state fleets, not contemplating private fleets.
Got it. I might ask that for a little, maybe Bo and Lewis, if anybody else wants to raise their hand for us to sort of tweak this recommendation to make sure that it's both as accurate and also as actionable as possible. It's possible that in the effort to consolidate very similar recommendations, something might have gotten lost in translation. So let's look at this together over the next day or two and revise it a little bit. So Zach,
Yep.
Bo, Lewis, Is there anybody else from the group who would like to be involved in adjusting this one? Ian, is that you volunteering to do that?
Yeah, I mean, clearly fleet incentives, it's an interest of MEA, so I'd be happy to participate in that conversation.
Okay. All right, if after the fact anybody else, wants to raise their hand, shoot me a note. All right. Other suggestions, comments? Also, can everybody see this well enough? I can make it larger.
I thought it was just me. Well, much better.
Ben,
Question on number 3, in terms of the recalibration of the 8.25 million. I don't have an issue with that idea, but I guess, are we, as this group, going to because these recommendations effectively would end the main subsidy going to light duty vehicles via the state without probably putting any sort of backstop in there for what's going to happen. And that's what we're recommending to the governor. So is that what we want to recommend, or should this be more reworded as possibly a retooling of the 8.25 million to either better incentivize like basically kind of lay out what the governor could choose to reprioritize, whether it be finding a way to better use it to incentivize light duty, or it could go to the MUDs, which I think is a market segment a lot of us agree needs help, or maybe this gets tied into the first recommendation for prioritized state incentives. So not only recalibrate the 8.5, but also increase support. I don't know, but I guess my worry is we're basically through this saying, end the one incentive I'm at least aware of for the light duty vehicles coming out of the state.
I was going to raise the same issue, Ben. So thanks. I would agree that our opinion, we shouldn't be kind of overly prescriptive. I think many of us on this call agree that the structure of the current incentive program leaves something much, depending on who you are, to be desired. I think there's a way that I think most of us could agree on, just advocating for evaluation of the program amongst the legislature to make it, most effective and really highlighting the goal, most effective at accelerating EV adoption.
Peter and Ian.
So I think I know we made this suggestion as well. And part of the reason was that the program, as it's currently funded, runs out in 2 months, and it creates more problems than it solves. And I don't think it moves the needle at all. Having said that, maybe we were too, we should have been more expansive with this. Look, we could take a look at, instead of, I think it maxes out at $3,000 a vehicle, you could come up with a smaller number that would make sure it lasted for the year. Maybe that would be more. I certainly I agree. I think Bo makes a somewhat of a good point. I don't want to give the impression that, incentives are useless and so we don't want to use them. That's not the point that we were trying to make. The point is that the program is currently funded, and we certainly understand, the budget constraints that the state of Maryland has. And so, if we could have a $7,500 per vehicle incentive, we're going to sell a bunch more EVs now, but that's just not a possibility. So maybe we were too direct in saying, because I don't want to give the impression that incentives don't work. It's just that we thought maybe the money could be used more effectively somewhere else. But again, maybe making a tweak to the program and saying, you get up to $1,000 per vehicle. If that would, make it last for a majority of the year, that would, maybe that's another alternative to look at there.
Zach, you've got 3 hands from Ian, Ben, and Megan.
Ian?
All right, I agree with what's been said here. I think that I won't spend a lot of time now because I think we've talked about it and it's readily apparent that the current program is not accomplishing its intended purpose. So I think the question is, what is the best use of those funds, assuming that's all the funds that are available? As a matter of law, it only has to be funded 1 more year. So this is a good opportunity for the legislature to take a look at what the best way to use those funds are. It may or may not be charging infrastructure, which I guess was sort of the thrust of the, recommendation as it's stated here. I think we might want to be clear in the report. Maybe we're not saying move it to charging infrastructure, but we are going to say it should be revised to improve its effectiveness. And maybe that is, reducing the incentive level so that it lasts longer and go to more people if additional resources aren't available. But I think we should clarify here that the current program probably is not worth keeping, in its current form.
All I'm going to say is me too. And when this narrative is written up, I think what Peter has said should be in the narrative, because I find that a compelling explanation for why it's going there, but also a good siren call for as we continue to think of more incentives to, avoid those kinds of outcomes. So I think the narrative that Peter has is a very good one to include in the report. Thanks.
Is what I'm capturing in the note here sort of generally like that shifting this to be more evaluate recalibration of state consumer incentives towards specific uses and at levels that most accelerate EV adoption?
Yes.
Okay. And then we can, to your point, Ian, acknowledge that it's because there are noted broadly agreed upon challenges with the current program structure.
It's Megan, then Delegate Stein, then David.
Yeah, one of the other things we talked about here was beyond the incentive for buying a new EV was, adding an incentive for purchasing a used EV to encourage more people who are low to moderate income to be able to purchase an EV. That's something that was a federal incentive that recently disappeared. So that's something you can add in as another thing that we could suggest in here as a recalibration.
Okay, can you say that again? I want to capture the.
Right now, our incentive is just for the purchasing of a new EV. They could also expand that to include an incentive for the purchase of a used EV. The incentive is directed towards people who qualify as low to moderate income. That's how the federal incentive worked. It was used EVs if you were below a certain income threshold, but now that has now disappeared. As a result of the big ugly bill, as we'll call it. So that's one of the things we talked about in the work group.
Okay. Who else has hands up? Delegate Stein.
Thank you. I like what Ian and Megan are suggesting. And generally, I think it's good to have some specificity in this recommendation for the legislature because, during the 90-day session, legislature is not going to be in a position to do a study of what's the most cost-effective approach. I mean, in turn, we would probably look back at the agencies and say, what do you recommend? So, having some particular items in there, like Ian, Megan is suggesting, I think is good.
So keep targeted areas like multifamily. Is it like multifamily charging? LMHI test for used vehicle incentives, etc.
Yes.
Okay. David, your hand's next.
Yeah, thanks. So it's helpful to hear Delegate Stein thoughts on how this might interact with the market study for incentives that was also listed here as a recommendation. I think one of the things, so there's a few points that I guess we've sort of talked about in this conversation, but so in the sort of recalibration note that you have at the top, I think, that you noted most accelerate EV adoption. And I guess I'm wondering to what degree that actually is the primary goal here, because I think given there are potentially competing goals here, right? If your goal is about equity, ensuring, if it is about growing, like depending on how you're defining, is it maximizing the number of EVs on the road, or is it putting them where they need to be for the benefit of the state of Maryland? So I wonder here, I guess one piece that it does sort of this question on like whether you look at like what is the most effective policy for growing the number of EV users. If you're talking about, depending on what you're talking about, it could be charging infrastructure, because that can be used by particularly folks who may not have infrastructure, may not be in single family homes, which are going to be predominant, and because the single family homes are like that's more focused on, new vehicle buyers and a community that for whom incentives actually are much less effective. And so I think I'm a little bit torn here, because I think the market study piece sort of explicitly identifies that incentives are not actually very effective for new vehicle buyers per dollar. And that there are more, I think the recommendation here around shifting that to charging infrastructure was sort of this part of this recommendation, that there are more effective tools, but it also depends on like more effective tools to do precisely what. And I guess that's where it still feels like there's a lot of fuzziness about what we're trying to accomplish here. And I worry that if we don't explicitly capture something around lower income communities that haven't had the same opportunity to take advantage of the EV, or that if we explicitly want to grow EV adoption in the communities that would most benefit from it, for example, something capturing that feels like in this note would be helpful, because otherwise I feel like this broader point is going to be lost. And especially since it seems like while the natural flow would have been complete the study, fix the program, Delegate Stein sort of said, at least that's not a timetable that's going to work. So I think like trying to pull forward some recommendations that would have naturally popped out of the market study would be more helpful.
Yeah, I think that those are good points. And I mean, I think that we're all trying to hit as many of those goals as possible, and recognize that they're not separate. I mean, the market segments where we're seeing some of the most difficulty, penetrating are in lower and moderate income segments, because of those barriers of multi-unit dwelling and community charging and, purchase price. So, I think that there's a lot of overlap there. I mean, Delegate Stein, do you have any thoughts on that from a legislative? You framed, what would be valuable for, for legislators to have to think through on incentives. Do you think that there's value to putting some qualifiers around the goals we're trying to reach, or of it's just maximizing incentives just to maximize deployment, or maximize deployment in particular areas? And not to put you on the spot, this is something you think about, and we can think about how to frame this in the recommendations in the coming days.
Yeah. I guess, personally, I, support, trying to expand outreach, expand purchases by LMI communities. But I guess there's the question of whether you want to add that to the goal of while in the context of expanding EV purchases as much as possible. So I guess perhaps recommendations from the market study might be most effective. I mean, maybe you can do both at the same time.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dave. That's a good thing for us to be sensitive to. Ian?
Yeah, that the other thing I think that we have to be aware of is what kind of signals we're sending as a state, right? If we were to pull back vehicle incentives altogether, purchase incentives, that may be misinterpreted by some stakeholders within and outside of the state as no longer being interested in supporting, electric vehicles, particularly as the federal subsidies go away. So I think that, whether we do that, if we were to go in that direction, I don't mean we as the work group necessarily, but as a state, it would be important to keep that context in mind. And even as for our recommendations that we, be aware of that, because we don't want to send the wrong signal.
That's a really good point. Okay. Any other, I know we've spent a lot of time on this one. Are there other incentive recommendations that that people have suggestions on? And I know some of this, what the notes I just took will spill onto both this one and the market study. All right, in the interest of time and seeing no hands up, I think we should keep moving forward. How do people feel about taking a break? I know it's 1:20, but we still have a decent chunk to get through, and I want to make sure that we're not spilling too much past our 2 p.m. or not spilling past our 2 p.m. Cutoff point. Especially since we're virtual, are people comfortable skipping a break and or an official break and just going off camera if they need to? All right, great. Let's talk about regulatory concepts. So we have 4 here. So, recommendation around maintaining or continuing to hold the ACC2 and ACT regs with enforcement discretion was one of the key recommendations here. Studying the Maryland implementation of a low carbon or clean fuel standard was recommended and discussed at the last meeting. Continued regulatory engagement with other states that are looking at multi-state regulatory approaches, sort of, including but beyond the ACC2 framework and ACT framework. And then there was a specific recommendation around state agency engagement and regulatory proceeding. So this is one I think that one also is one where it would be helpful to get some clarity on what the recommender intended there, to just describe that a little bit more. Megan, let me turn to you first.
Yeah, I was trying to think of some ways to suggest some friendly amendments to the maintaining ACC2 and ACT regulations. First of all, this is in terms of enacting and passing policies, that is up to the General Assembly. So I suggest that the start says the Maryland General Assembly should not enact legislation, which would change the beginning of that. That would remove Maryland as a 177 state, so it would change that. And then for the end of the sentence where it says allowing flexibility through enforcement discretion, I would add on to that, as directed in the governor's April 2025 executive order. Just a question on the OEM transparency in advertising and sales. Isn't that the same issue we addressed earlier?
This is probably, as I was consolidating things, a fragment. Ended up in this.
Yeah, strike that. Okay, good.
That's not part of this. Okay. Louis, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. So on that same one, of course, that's one I'm going to jump in on. So I'd actually, not to contradict what was just offered, I'd suggest shortening that one, like essentially after the word current, because the other things about enforcement and reporting continuity, I am not opposed to the ACC or ACT staying consistent with California's rule, right? And so I understand those rules are going to continue to be promulgated for that consistency purpose, because no one knows what the litigation outcome will be. But what is very clear, I would suggest right now, is that the regulations can remain on the book, but there's no enforcement of those regulations. And so that's where I might suggest, we revisit sort of that last line a little bit, that I know Megan just offered some modifications to as well. So it might need some further wordsmithing there.
So you're suggesting, reiterate Maryland should keep its ACT2 and ACT regulations current while
And
exercising.
I would probably stop right there personally, because you can't force an OEM right now to do anything until such time as the litigation is resolved related to ACC2 and ACT. But there are other hands up who might have a different perspective. So,
David, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that part of the reason why I would be concerned about axing that specificity is that I think regardless of whether or not the rule is enforceable, that's a primary channel for information that is of interest to the state. And so I think maintaining sort of the reporting process was one of the ways, like by explicitly stating that, like through to establish that sort of continuity. So I think that was where, so I think the extent that, that has to be balanced to recognize. I think having that specificity was just sort of a part of the desire for at least some of the folks who chimed in on this point on sort of flexibility, like maintaining at least the program structurally, even if it actually can't be enforced. I think there still is interest in that, so that the state could hit the ground running when they can enforce whatever it is that's ends up coming out of the process.
Louis and then Peter.
So yeah, maybe I just suggest like a slight modification somehow, that instead of something like ensuring reporting continuity, but encouraging, if you want to still encourage OEMs to provide the information pending the outcome of the regulation. My issue is just legally, I don't think you can do it, and ensuring makes it sound like that's going to be an effort to try and mandate. But again, I can certainly understand the interest in gathering the information on a voluntary basis with the OEMs. So,
okay. And perhaps there might have also been some confusion there around like the new California emergency reg, which they tend to follow up with a permanent reg on reporting under ACC1, which would be required. It would not encouraged, but that's not an ACC.
That's a good point. That's a really good point, Zach.
Yeah.
So sort of the differentiation between the programs where that's still managed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And David, that sounds good to you? I saw a thumbs up.
Yeah, exactly. Something, yes. Yeah. That seems directionally right. So.
Yeah. Peter?
I'm good. But when I have one concern you guys address this, I'm good.
Okay. Look at this. This is great. Delegate Stein.
Yeah, I'll say ditto as well. I like the idea of saying encouraging reporting continuity and just putting a period there.
Okay. Okay. I'm just gonna, well, I'll delete it and see if anyone follows up with heartburn at that, but we have the record of the language there. Okay, other recommendations in the regulatory space. Studying a low carbon fuel standard is one that, Bo, I believe you put that forward. So did MDE. This is one that has come from that the Maryland Climate Commission has recommended. We believe there's value in studying it. We know that, again, it's a study recommendation, not something that will play out immediately, but has some value in exploring. Similarly, we felt that continuing to be a part of the conversations with other states so that we can help shape and lead those conversations. For instance, continuing to be an active participant in the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition, who we heard from at the last meeting, is something that we should maintain, but interested in any reactions or questions on these other ones. Ben.
Just a question on the last one, state agency engagement and regulatory proceedings. So I guess I'm trying to understand what more engagement someone is looking for here. So I guess I can't speak for the Department of Planning, but like the PSC, we've had a proceeding running since 2017 or 18 on EV deployment and charging infrastructure in the state, an active working group. And the governor's office, I assume via MDOT and MEA, has been an active participant in those discussions. So I guess I'm trying to understand how is this pushing it forward? I'm supportive of more coordination in the state, so I'm happy to leave it as is. I just was curious the need for this recommendation, but not opposed to it. Joe? Yes, thanks.
Yeah, maybe, we can soften the language or massage it where deemed appropriate. But I think, acknowledging the opportunity and also the need for engagement, right? We have a vested interest as a state entity in terms of partnering and supporting and or requesting changes to regulations or other efforts. We've seen success in terms of partnering and commenting on open dockets and requesting other changes. But I think, we as a state entity have a vested stake in. So I think this is our interest towards that. Maybe the wording could be massaged in the appropriate way if you so deem it, but in general, feel this is of value and of benefit to say we should be engaging, because that hasn't always been the case, right? In terms of a state agency engaging in the process of PSC engagements. But I'll pause there.
I'm happy to support the language if MDOT is volunteering on that, because we want you involved. So yeah, no, I just didn't know where it's coming from. But if it was a state agency saying we want to stay engaged or get more engaged, absolutely. Just was curious where it's coming from. Thanks.
Ian?
So maybe along those lines, rather than evaluating the need, maybe we are reaffirming the need, or maybe it's just engagement. Maybe it's not more engagement. Just to restate, and that we're going to continue and double down on it, and we all recognize the importance of it. It might be as simple as that.
Okay, yeah, we can follow up with MDOT or NPSC if there's more tweaks that could help clarify the intent here, but that makes sense. I'm sorry, I thought I saw another hand, but now I don't see it. Is there a hand up? No?
I don't see one, Zach.
Okay. Okay, let's keep powering through. So this is our biggest category. And I think Sierra Club and others submitted a lot of these. We tried to break them out because several people submitted these, and in some cases, there was one recommendation with a lot of things in it, and then other people submitted them as multiple different recommendations. So hopefully what we have done in the consolidation and merging or breaking things up is still accurately capturing the intent here. Apologies if we did not accomplish that. So please weigh in if some of the intent or meaning has been lost. And then Ben, I know that you've been looking closely at this section. So I'll open the floor to, to this universe of 10 or so recommendations on utility and grid actions. Ben?
Yeah, Zach, I can go first or last if you want me to. I have several edits to this section.
Yeah. Your hand is the one up right now.
All right. So I guess to start off, and I can maybe I just need to send you a red line to this section. I think, yeah, I would, especially if this is a recommendation to the governor for action that the governor's office should be taking. This really should be more of a explore, encourage your agencies to decide what their positions are going to be in these areas. So a lot of this is actually in front of the commission under litigation or has been litigated before. So MEA, MDOT may or may not have previous positions in front of the commission on some of this. So I guess kind of going, this is actually even before the recommendations. I'll start with the rate structure. The commission has evaluated demand charges, has made decisions, gave guidance on what to do there. So I guess if the work group is saying that we haven't made those right decisions, happy to have that discussion. But there is guidance back to the utilities on what to do there if there is to be a re-proposal in that area. And I'm happy as the work group leader to facilitate those discussions. We're also constantly talking about time of use rates. So I don't know that rate structure needs to be here, but happy to keep it at a high level if you want it there to make sure it's still something we are constantly evaluating to ensure it's appropriately attracting EVs to the state. I guess just going straight down, bolster, make ready. Generally the first part, most like once again, subject to that we are evaluating this, but in terms of feedback I would have, this should probably, and anywhere where utility investments being made, this should be done in conjunction with the other state agencies to ensure that there's the right mix between ratepayer funds and public taxpayer funds. So rates, you're going to hear me say a lot, are regressive. I'm billing customers via their usage, not their income levels. And so effectively we will be funding a public mechanism via the rates. That's not to say we shouldn't have make ready programs. The commission will be issuing an order in the near future on that issue. But I would say we should be considering when change that word to consider, but then in terms of that should be including feedback on how the state's policy and need for this investment. The second half of that where we should set targets, we generally do that. I suggest striking it because it's not how worded, tied, it's untethered to, is this incentivizing EVs? So this is an issue I think the program ran into via the public charging stations where we built it and then we didn't see a lot of usage of it. And some people might view that as okay, some others might not. And so there's a little bit of this chicken and the egg debate I get in with some people about, is it the infrastructure that's needed now, or is it we need to get more EVs? It's probably a combination of the two. But anyways, I don't like the idea of setting targets and then out just blindly and then saying go for it. So anyways, we do that in the programs. If you keep it, not the worst thing in the world, we already do that, but I don't think it's necessary. I'll stop there to let Josh go and then I can keep going through.
Josh?
Yeah, sure. I think probably the most efficient way of having this conversation would be to take a look at the red lines. I think for the targets, the real point of the target language is for multi-unit dwellings where we had really poor performance of utilities in building out that. It's a much more difficult segment to penetrate than rebates for single family homes. And I don't think that rebates for single family homes at this point in the arc of EV adoption is really what we should be focusing on. So if there's a different way of holding utilities accountable for having effective programs that can get charging into multi-unit dwellings, that I'd be very interested in taking a look at that. But I think that a lot of this comes down to language. So I think it's going to be more efficient to take a look at the whatever red lines Ben has. One other question I do have that I can't recall off the top of my head is whether or not the specific issue of the demand charge, of how demand charges are treated in the context of medium and heavy duty charging infrastructure has been addressed. If it has been, then that's one issue. That's a different story. But if it hasn't, I think that it would be good to take a look at that, and particularly because we've learned a lot since 2017 when the last docket that the commission issued an order in took place.
So the commission's been issuing orders on this since 2017. We addressed demand charges 2 years ago. But yeah, if you want to, I'm happy to work on language there. Zach, how would you like me to proceed? I can keep walking through this. Happy to send red line. I have red line if you want me to share.
I mean, maybe if you want to flag, top line, thoughts on all of this just for the group's awareness. But I do think that, we're in a area of highly specialized knowledge that, I think you and Josh in particular have. And so I do think that, an offline redlining conversation there would be most helpful. And then we can bake that into the final product. Is everybody comfortable with that approach? Or give me a thumbs down if anybody doesn't like that approach. Okay. Ian, I see your hand up.
On the make ready, I just want to reemphasize something that I know I've mentioned at least once before when we had this conversation, maybe this past summer, that I want to make sure that while make ready definitely can make sense, that there's got to be some degree of commitment or maybe certainty, maybe a little strong, but commitment on the part of, some kind of a fleet operator or whoever we're targeting who may be utilizing these investments, that it's actually good, that they're going to follow through. Otherwise, I just want to make sure we minimize the potential for stranded costs, which have ratepayer impacts. And, I know the utilities are not on this work group, but at the end of the day, they are not going to be paying for these investments. It will be ratepayers. So I just want to acknowledge that. I know Josh and I have had that conversation, and so I don't want to replay the whole debate here. I just want to acknowledge it.
Yeah, just in direct response, I agree. That makes sense to me.
All right, so including that acknowledgement language in the recommendation or perhaps, Ian, we can look at the introduction here too.
Yeah, but I don't know that we have to have the acknowledgement included in the recommendation, as long as the recommendation reflects what Ian just said.
Yeah. Okay. Other ones, Ben or Josh, please, jump in on any of these other recommendations in the utility and PSC space.
All right. I would say most of these, my edits are going to be mostly either asking for slightly broader language and then listing some of the recommendations more as strategies we could consider. That's something I would recommend in the bottom upload forecast, the direct the utilities to ensure utilities upgrade the grid section, the improved fleet planning advisory services. That's a similar one where it's just explore. I will say that's litigated in front of the commission, and we'll have an order out on that either concurrently or slightly after this report is out. The hosting capacity, similar issue of exploring. Conduct, we would maintain, but as an example, flexible interconnection, once again, similar idea. I like the idea. The last one, though, improve and expand V2G. So that one, we are already actually in front of what this recommendation is getting to. I'll have some proposed language for the back half to make it a little bit more generic. But the commission has actually issued orders telling the utilities to bring us V2G programs or strategies to get to programs this January. Via the Drive Act. So I just want to make sure everyone was aware of that we're actually in front of this already. But in terms of the first paragraph, I will have no edits to that paragraph. So anyways, that's generally where I'm at on the section. So it's more broadening this and making them more evaluation strict instead of direct exactly how it should go. Thank you.
Thanks. And it's helpful to know where the PSC is already sort of at the cusp of effectively getting to pieces of what these recommendations are. I don't, from my perspective, I think it only helps to have recommendations that reinforce what you're doing. But if there's any places where that creates a complication, please say so. So, all right. I know. So, I know that we're going to have some further offline iteration on these before we send the next draft around to the group. Any other questions or concerns or suggestions on the utility and grid recommendations? No. All right. Seeing none. Well, this is pretty much our last group. So this was, based on a few recommendations that were surrounding this theme. Oh, Megan? Megan?
I'm just commenting on these ones.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I grouped these two because of sort of what they were, how they were framed into a category of, specific action, sort of more inward facing actions for state government. So yeah, Megan, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, I mentioned this last time on the cabinet level coordination. Secretary McElwain and I already chaired the climate sub-cabinet, which does talk about EV related topics. As I pointed out, I would suggest deleting the last line. We can't establish a cabinet level work group that includes independent agency heads that include the PSC and the Attorney General. That was suggested to me with the climate sub-cabinet, and I talked to our general counsel's office. It's just not something we can legally do.
Okay, and then is the thinking to further sort of incorporate that cabinet level coordination function within the climate sub-cabinet rather than a separate body?
So fine with this recommendation. It sounds like people feel strongly about this. So if you want to keep it that way, I just thought I'd mention the climate sub-cabinet, but I'm otherwise fine with the recommendation as is. I just wanted to point out that we wouldn't be able to establish something cabinet level that included the AG and the PSC on it.
Okay. All right, and then this one about leading by example through government fleet procurement. So this is focused on both state of Maryland and local governments. That's something that could be adjusted, but any reactions to this one?
This one's mine, so I'll just hype it up. We're big advocates of this, as you can imagine. And I live down in DC. The city recently procured about 60 of Rivian's pickup trucks for their fleet. And, just seeing electric vehicles in use with, beds full of tree branches, gives consumers a degree of confidence. Not that specific, but and I mentioned this in our last working group, this is a way to directly get butts in seats and help accelerate the transition. So we're big fans.
Okay. I think it's a great recommendation. I think there might be, this is one that I also want to run by DGS, our Department of General Services, just in case there's any sort of legal flags we have to be sensitive to, but sounds good. Any other reactions?
Just spell out what ICE means.
Yep, I just replaced. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna do a find and replace in the whole report on that. All right, and then there was this last one that parts of this already fit into other recommendations, but then parts of it did have some specifics. I didn't want to accidentally lose meaning in this one by condensing it without understanding, again, the goal. So, Lewis, are you raising your hand because this was your recommendation?
No, it's not. So I'll let whoever's it. I think this was one like part of the Sierra Club's original letter, but I'll let them comment first. Since
Okay.
that's
So I think so. A lot of these, I mean, we've been talking at a high level about, adopting additional incentives and requirements to encourage EV adoption is the whole point of the exercise. I know there's a reference to advanced clean fleets, so that might bear some might be valuable to discuss a little bit. And then expanding steps that the Green Bank can take to provide low interest, no interest financing for EV purchases. I think that's an idea that hasn't been captured here, but that perhaps could be combined with the recommendation earlier on expanding private investment in, I mean, that recommendation was focused on charging infrastructure. So I don't know, I would love the originators of the recommendation to talk about, is this meant for the whole universe of EV capital needs, or specific to vehicle purchases or charging infrastructure installation? So I just wanted to flesh out a little bit more of what this recommendation is targeting that's distinct from pieces of it that are already being covered in other places in the recommendations. Anyone want to weigh in on that? Louis, is your hand up now again on this one specifically, or
it is, but I'm Josh has his hand up too, and I think
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, at this point, a lot of this is reflected in our other recommendations. I do think that there is value in evaluating whether or not something like a clean truck fund. Well, I don't want to be prescriptive. I think there are other regulatory approaches out there that other states have adopted that would be useful to explore or to evaluate. I do not know that. God knows, I don't believe more studies are needed, but I do think that some kind of an evaluation of regulatory programs that other states are implementing to understand what the effect is of those programs, how effective they are, such as, again, the Clean Truck Fund, which some states have applied to their ports to incentivize electrification of drayage trucks. There are some clean, green bank approaches that have been adopted by those states. I don't, at this point, I think that this is probably sort of, I don't want to be pejorative, but like a Frankenstein of a whole lot of other recommendations. But there are a few things in there that are not included in that, and I think the best way to accomplish, I think what this sort of distilled final recommendation would look like would be to study or to research and evaluate other regulatory mechanisms that other states are implementing to see about their suitability in Maryland.
Okay, so is it regulatory or incentive? Is this really more of an incentive recommendation? Like,
it is definitely regulatory. There's definitely regulatory elements, such as the Clean Truck Fund is essentially a fee per haul of containers by older diesel drayage trucks at ports, and that the funds from that Clean Truck Fund, for this is just an example, is made available to incentivize and defray the cost of other drayage trucks at the port to electrify.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one example. Another example would be, so it's a regulatory mechanism that creates either a funding stream or an incentive to electrify.
Got it.
Another example would be an indirect source review rule. That's not listed here. But these are just examples of regulations that other states are implementing that Maryland should at least consider.
Do you mind if I schedule a follow-up with you, Josh, to dig in a little bit more on that?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, great. Because I want to make sure that those ideas are captured, and move this up to the regulatory bucket of recommendations with the appropriate framing. Louis?
Sorry, yeah, Zach. So just, and Josh knew I was coming in with some concerns about this recommendation because we did talk about this. I think my concern, one, is as it's written right now, it's about adopt these programs, right? It's not an exploration. And there are certainly some things that give us a lot of cause for concern, and that we haven't talked about any of these issues so far. So just sort of keeping that in mind in the modification, should this be included in the final report, is, I think, really important.
Sure. I mean, Louis, I'm happy to include you in those conversations. I also think we're talking really about studying those other regulatory structures, much, not adopting any without studying them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and as a direct response, as I said when I was speaking with Louis, I think that's entirely reasonable and appropriate.
Okay, great. That concludes our list of recommendations, all 30 plus of them. Any overall observations looking back across the conversation and across these recommendations now? I just, my observation, having gone through all of these here and prior to the meeting is that there's just a lot of good thinking here. Both it was reflected in the conversations that we've had over the last few months directly, but also what I see and what's been inspired by those conversations, and just really appreciate the thoughtfulness that so many of you put into developing these, and thinking about, Maryland's context and how to operate within, within the state here. So thank you for that. If there's nothing else, Megan, can I turn it over to you for any sort of closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Zach. And I'm going to turn over for some final comments from the Moore-Miller administration. For today's meeting, Secretary McElwain had to head to a meeting on the Chesapeake Bay. For those of you who follow other more broader environmental topics, you may know we have a big meeting of the Chesapeake Bay Environmental Executive Council coming up here on December 2nd. So she's busy with her other hat preparing for that. So I just want to thank all of you in this work group. We powered through what ended up being 30 different recommendations in 2 hours here. I feel like this work group, everyone here has handled themselves in a very professional and collegial manner. It felt like today's meeting went extremely well, and we were able to get some really great feedback on the recommendations, and to feel like things are in a really good place for the final report. As Secretary McElwain mentioned in her opening comments, Zach and all of us will be working to synthesize these recommendations down based on the feedback we received today. I know that he parked a couple of recommendations where some of you need to have some sidebar conversations, like I know Josh Stebbins and Ben and Zach need to talk specifically about some of the PSC related recommendations and what have you. We'll have those recommendations, and then you'll receive a document from us that is the more synthesized version of the recommendations, and also a Google form that will allow you to vote on your top picks. Is everyone feeling like 5 is the amount that you would like to see, your top 5 or top 3? Does anyone have a strong opinion either way? Otherwise, we're going to go with 5. Bo, I see 5. Any strong views against 5? Okay, so we're going to allow each of you who are official members of the work group to vote in that Google form on your top 5 recommendations. That way, in the final report, those will be the 5 recommendations that are highlighted at the top as the recommendations that receive the most consensus out of the work group. So the General Assembly, as they receive the report, and others as they view the report, those will be highlighted. They'll also be highlighted in the executive summary that will be in the report. So the report itself will be pretty straightforward. It will include our original work plan, which all of you signed off on. It will include the membership of the work group. We may also link to the agendas and the minutes from the meetings. And it will include our recommendations and probably a one-page executive summary of the work group. So you guys will receive a copy of that also in advance of the December meeting to review. I think we should be able to get through going through the report at the December meeting based on how well today's meeting went. But obviously we will need to come back together if we aren't able to finish going through the whole report. But because we made such progress today on the recommendations, I wouldn't expect that we'll need to have an additional meeting in December. As always, Zach and I are available if any of you have any particular questions. And I just want to thank all of you for how well this group has gone together, and for just how professional today's meeting went. And I hope all of you, since we won't see you until December, have a wonderful Thanksgiving and have a great rest of your day.